I know this is a bit of low-hanging fruit, but World War I changed everything for Canada's railways. From the Grand Trunk Pacific completing a second transcontinental railway and building their own luxury network of railway hotels to compete with the Canadian Pacific, to only a few years later, with the exception of the Canadian Pacific, over 120 railways in Canada would collapse and absorb into a newly formed government-operated Canadian National Railways, or as we know them today, CN. And CN was eager to make their mark on Montreal and would announce plans to erect a station of their own. They began construction on today's Montreal Central Station in 1926, but progress would be halted in 1930 by the Great Depression. Work would resume in 1939, and the station would finally open to the public in 1943. And with the conclusion of both World Wars, Canadian National would invest heavily in expanding their network of railway hotels. They built the Jasper Park Lodge in 1922. They expanded the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa in 1926, over doubling its room capacity. They would open the Bessborough in Saskatoon in 1935, the Hotel Vancouver in 1939, just in time for the war tour that year. And they would expand the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton in 1949 following the Alberta oil boom. And they even rebuilt that same Jasper Park Lodge in 1952 after a fire completely consumed the original. But CN was still sending passengers to the Canadian Pacific hotels in Montreal. So in 1954, CN announced plans to build Montreal's newest and most ambitious railway hotel to date. And this hotel would be cutting edge in every manner. They would erect it on top of their brand new station, something no railway had done to date. And construction would begin on June 23rd of 1954, and 6 months later, President Donald Gordon would spark protests throughout Montreal when he announced the hotel would be named after Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. But the French faithful wanted the name to reflect their French culture, preferably one of Montreal's founding fathers. But Gordon held firm, and despite protesters being outside of their headquarters for over a week, they would eventually go home, tensions would die down, and the name remained. And the Queen Elizabeth Hotel would officially open on March 15th, of 1958, with the Queen herself in attendance for the grand opening, and the President in the background as you see here. The hotel featured a super sleek, super clean L-shaped design that personally I absolutely love. The Queen's exterior was composed of that signature white Indiana limestone on most CN hotels, towering 21 stories high with over 1,200 guest rooms, making it the second largest hotel in the entire British Commonwealth, only behind the Royal York, which was Toronto's railway hotel, opened in 1929, but had recently expanded from 1,000 to over 1,400 rooms in 1953. But it is worth noticing that the Queen Elizabeth is almost identical to the box edition at the Hotel Macdonald that they'd opened only 4 years earlier in Edmonton. And to this day, the QE is the only railway hotel ever constructed on top of an active passenger station. And when I looked into it, it turns out that they reinforced the structure with 160 massive concrete pylons to deaden the sound and the vibrations of all the trains departing and passing below, making for a truly peaceful stay. Now, the original Windsor Hotel would burn down in 1959, and 5 years later in 1964, CP announced the construction of a new hotel, the Chateau Champlain, which would complete and open in 1966. Now, I stayed at the Champlain last winter and again recently, and make no mistake, this is a gorgeous hotel, and despite what locals say, I absolutely love the cheese grater style windows. But while technically the Champlain is the last railway hotel built in Canada, it doesn't look like one, and it was really just constructed for Montreal's Expo 67 the following year. And the Canadian Pacific had been pushing really hard to get rid of all passenger service by this time because of the completion of the Trans-Canada Highway. So, as far as I am concerned, the Queen Elizabeth is Canada's last real railway hotel. But feel free to disagree with me in the comment section below. By the late 1970s, CN had began selling off all of its hotels. And in 1988, the Canadian Pacific had acquired all of their remaining properties, including the Queen herself. And despite building the Champlain directly across the street only 20 years earlier, CP would sell her in 1993 to Marriott Hotels, And in the year 2000, the Canadian Pacific had acquired Fairmont hotels from down in the US and would rebrand all their hotels as Fairmont, then making the Queen Elizabeth the Fairmont Queen Elizabeth Hotel. And that brings me to my experience here in Montreal's castle in 2025. This was a clip for a full-length show. If you want to watch the full episode of the clip you just saw, click right here, you get the full show, and they go up live every single Sunday. If you want more clips of what you just saw, click right here, you can see the next great hit.